Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's wonderful out today. Thomas Jefferson has given us 84 degrees, or so he reports from the great beyond. 37% humidity and 10-mile-an-hour winds, although I don't feel anything at all. That may change. The green is coming out, and so it's beginning to look and feel like spring. And the temperature also says something about it. I was trying to think about, given what's going on, what's the best thing to talk about while I've been walking out here. And I think that there are kind of two levels of division that can separate us and dilute our force in resistance against Trump's monarchy. One is to think, as politicians have over the last set of presidential elections, that, we can all fix this at the ballot box. Well, the presidential election should teach us that that's not the case. Unlimited money, telling lies repeatedly, apparently can help you win an election. And I believe that that's a fair assessment. So we have to be fighting what I think is the path to monarchy, oligarchy, despotism, and because that is the game he's playing. And we can't play a different game and talk about scores in that game if it's not affecting the primary game and the most important one, which is Trump's ability to take over the government in an undemocratic way, using force, coercion, and assaulting everything that is democratic and everything that was the republic. So that's one set of things. The other is we have to stop this thinking that they, Trump and company, don't understand what they're doing, and couple our observations that are critical with action. Talk takes us so far, but action is responsible. Like what? Well, like what's happening in the courts and how some law firms are coming up to the table and prepared to fight. And that's it. So between the normal politics of preparing for a midterm and this right-wing revolution, if you will, seeking to place a dictator in the West Wing, we have to take the fight to preserve and protect the Republic and to assure our democratic representation and the freedoms that will go with all of that. So, in recent days, we've seen more visibly how Trump has been staging himself to question the legitimacy of two principal past allies. One is Canada, and the other is Greenland. Now, some say to talk about World War III is to speak too loosely. Is it possible? And I think the answer is, it is possible. And I do think we can defeat it, but we have to acknowledge it first, that there is a path. I don't think Trump is ready to execute that path. So this is a prime time for us to not just talk, but to act. So court cases saying you can't go offshore and you can't do this, and this is the limit on your powers and so forth, is important stuff. But the other question is, how do we manage the military? Is Trump going to have free rein to follow up on what he might do? Now, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit in this conversation, but let's take apart a couple of these pieces. If we look at Greenland, what we have is, we see with Greenland and Canada, Trump wants to push over above and below the Arctic Circle, our influence, putting us opposite Russia, China, and Korea. Now, is it ultimately an objective of Trump that we will all become one club and then divide up the rest of the world? Or will we fight over it as has been our past experience? Hard to say. But if you look at a map and you look at these properties, which is the way Trump sees it, and we talk about the need we have to expand, you may hear a historical tug, like, haven't we been here before? And so you should keep in mind, when you have Steve Bannon and Miller drawing up the plans for Trump, that they're all thinking these things. Now, did Vance go to Greenland because of bad judgment, clumsiness? No. He did this because it's part of a plan, hatched invisibly perhaps, on Signal Chat, which destroys and disappears whatever occurs on the Signal Chat, as you designate when it should disappear after the conversation is over, as to all participants. So I am saying, I don't think this is the only time in the world that collection of highly visible members of the Trump cabinet were present to discuss what to do with Yemen, but also they discussed what they thought of our European allies and more. In other words, things they don't want anybody else to know. And I suppose if a journalist hadn't been accidentally added and they hadn't oversold, that is, they, say our Secretary of State and others, and Defense Secretary and so on, if they hadn't sold that it's all a lie, it didn't happen, then the full text wouldn't have come out. But it's hard to believe when you see the full text that this is the only time it ever happened. So yesterday, Trump said he intended to control Greenland. And he sent Vance, apparently, to Greenland to admonish Denmark. Of course, this stirred up both Denmark and Greenland. And Trump's argument is, we can do better. We need to be there, so you have to let us happen. You have to let this happen. Now, at the same time, we have in Canada the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who said yesterday that the old relationships with the United States are over. That is the integration of our economies, our tight security, our military cooperation. And I think that both Greenland, Denmark, and Canada understand what's going on here. These are the first dramatic steps to teach the world that we are coming for these targets and that we expect no one's going to interfere with us. So it will be us against them if we can't bring them to their knees, as bullies may do, by bullying and threatening and so forth. Now, Canada, rightly, is also upset because there are prior agreements that we're ignoring. And in response, Canada is going to join forces to EU in the tariff battle. So what's up? What can you say, looking at these data points, that this fits? And I hearken back to Winston Churchill. A long time ago, when people were scratching their heads, wondering what to do with Hitler, Churchill made a point of reading Mein Kampf, which in German, translated into English, means my struggle, Hitler's struggle. And when he was first in prison, he wrote most of part 1, and a couple of years later he published part 2. Nobody else was reading it. And it was it was, that's an interesting slip. It was Hitler's game plan. And others didn't read it. Churchill did. And Churchill told them this is what he intends to do. And I think they believed they were smarter being passive and letting Hitler have what he called Lebensraum, living space. Now, we today should read, or at least acknowledge, because we probably have read it, the people who matter, and realize that the excursion of mind and war plan that Hitler went through is similar and different than what we do today. So, for instance, France was a primary target for Hitler. And he didn't think he could take on France if Great Britain would support them. But part of his strategy, a risky one, of course, was that Britain would not help, and the targets that Hitler had in mind, he thought they would allow him to have, so he would get a foothold in his program. Now, he was upset with France because at the end of World War I, France was among those who would dismember and shatter Germany and take away their ability to have arms. Now, Germany under Hitler did rearm secretly, but he wanted to be able to do it publicly. And what was he going to do if he had such arms? Well, he didn't think he could expand to the west, but he could expand to the east. But that put him in conflict with Russia for sure. So how was he going to achieve this living space? Now, the answer is, in November the 15th, 1937, he had an agreement that permitted him to rearm. So he was in a position to secure and enlarge his force. And since he could not negotiate otherwise for the bigger prizes he wanted, he saw himself as an attacker against the possessory interests of his target military outcome. So, how is this similar to today? We are, I think, actually in an expedited schedule by Trump to follow at a different time with a different map of the world and different strengths and weaknesses. He's in a position not just to take all this money and to shrink the benefits of the people, but perhaps to take that money for war objects, to use it to tamp down those who would resist Trump at home for his domestic and international ambitions. Now, that's a lot to swallow. But if you're not thinking that way, something that he kind of hopes to have, when he acts upon it, then you know to be standing there and to stop it. Terrorism is about appearing in a point of conflict where the other side is not present. Even in that chat call the other day, they were talking about making an attack that was not anticipated or expected. So, as Hitler, so Trump, if not himself, although he's always shown such admiration for these outlaws, these potentates, these dictators, he knows that to go forward, certain things have to line up the right way. And so what's happening in Greenland and Canada is part of that. And if you can get them, eat away at them with small and large bites, then you may actually be able to seize them. Now, that sounds hard to believe, but if we can't think outside the box, we're going to find that he accomplishes it. I'm going to wake up one morning and we're going to be reading it in our newspapers above the fold. So, I don't know, those are a few thoughts I have. So when we see Greenland push back now and Canada push back now, we should be encouraged that these are steps in resistance that, when looking at other things that we're doing domestically to resist Trump, give us hope of how we can go forward in this fight and prevail. And if you will, cashier Trump for all that he would do if we do not oppose him. So that's what I got to say. I hope you're having a good warm day. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. I don't know what the temperature is, but I'll be out. All the best from my Cathedral of Trees, evergreening. Bye-bye.